Imagine two people, same age, same city, same salary. They graduate around the same time. They get hired into similar roles. They earn within a few $1,000s of each other. If you looked at them on paper, you would expect their financial lives to look almost identical 10 years later. And for a while, they do. They rent similar apartments, drive similar cars, take similar vacations. Their bank balances rise slowly. Their responsibilities grow at the same pace. From the outside, there's no visible gap forming. But somewhere along the way, one decision quietly splits their paths. Not a dramatic one, not a lottery ticket, not a sudden inheritance, not a reckless gamble. A decision that felt reasonable, responsible even. At the moment it was made, it didn't look like a turning point. It looked like a preference. One chose the option that guaranteed stability. The other chose the option that introduced uncertainty, temporarily. Both could justify their choice. Both had good arguments. If you asked them then, neither would say they were defining their financial future. They were just responding to the moment. Fast forward 10, 15, 20 years. One of them feels constrained, careful, constantly managing pressure. The other isn't necessarily richer in a flashy way, but their financial life feels different, lighter, more positioned, less defensive. The strange part, their income didn't diverge dramatically. Their intelligence didn't change. Their discipline didn't suddenly improve. The difference traces back to that one decision. Same income, same age, one choice, and everything that followed reorganized around it. The question isn't which one you would have chosen. The real question is, what kind of life does a single reasonable decision build if you let it compound long enough? I'm Sheldon. I spend most of my time analyzing how ordinary financial decisions quietly decide people's futures, usually without them realizing it. Not dramatic mistakes, not obvious failures. The kind of choices that feel completely reasonable in the moment and almost invisible in their long-term impact. If you've ever looked at someone your age, earning roughly what you earn, and wondered how their financial life feels so different from yours, this video is probably about that gap. Because financial outcomes don't just reflect income, they reflect trajectory. And trajectory is shaped less by effort and more by direction. Two people can work equally hard, budget carefully, avoid major mistakes, and still experience money very differently years later. Not because one got lucky, but because one decision changed what their future would be built around. Before we go further, tap the like button. It helps this video reach people who assume they're behind, when they may just be on a path that wasn't designed for where they want to go. And if this kind of thinking resonates with you, subscribe. This channel exists to help you recognize financial patterns early, before decades pass. Now let's look at the decision itself. Not emotionally, not morally, structurally. Because once you understand what that single choice actually committed each person to, the difference stops looking mysterious. The decision that split their paths wasn't about spending. It was about where to place risk. At a certain point, usually a few years into their careers, both were presented with a fork. One opportunity offered security, stable company, clear promotion ladder, predictable salary increases, minimal disruption. The other offered uncertainty, smaller company, commission-based upside, equity instead of guaranteed raises, or even a lateral move with unclear short-term payoff. Neither option was reckless. Both could be defended logically. One optimized for income continuity. The other optimized for future leverage. The first person chose the path that reduced immediate uncertainty. It aligned with everything they'd been taught. Secure the base, avoid volatility, protect steady growth. The second person chose the path that introduced temporary instability in exchange for asymmetric upside. Not because they were fearless, but because they evaluated the decision differently. Here's what most people miss. The choice wasn't about being conservative versus aggressive. It was about what their financial life would be built to support. The stability path built a life that required continuity. The leverage path built a life that tolerated fluctuation. At first, nothing looked different. The stable path produced consistent raises, predictable bonuses, a clean resume. The leverage path produced stress, inconsistent income, moments of doubt. If you froze time during those early years, you might even conclude the stable choice was smarter. It looked smoother, but decisions don't reveal themselves in the first few quarters. They reveal themselves after compounding. Because the stable path quietly accumulates commitments around the assumption that income will continue steadily. Mortgages sized to predictable raises. Fixed expenses aligned with reliable pay. A lifestyle that expects continuity. Meanwhile, the leverage path builds differently. Income volatility forces flexibility. Expenses stay lighter. Risk tolerance increases. One person optimizes for protecting what exists. The other optimizes for expanding what's possible. Neither is wrong. But they are not neutral. Once chosen, each path begins reinforcing itself. The stable path makes future risk feel expensive. The leverage path makes calculated risk feel normal. And over time, that psychological difference becomes financial. Not because one person worked harder, but because one decision altered what their financial life was designed to handle. The stable choice doesn't feel like playing it safe. It feels like being responsible. From early adulthood, most people are trained to value predictability. Steady paycheck, consistent growth, clear path forward. When you finally reach a point where those things are available, walking away from them feels irrational. Security reduces anxiety. That matters more than people admit. A guaranteed salary lets you plan. It lets you commit. It lets you project your future with confidence. And projection feels powerful. You can forecast raises, estimate promotions, anticipate milestones. Your financial life starts to look organized on paper. The leverage option, by contrast, doesn't offer clean projections. It offers potential. Potential doesn't calm the nervous system. Certainty does. That's the first psychological force at play. Immediate emotional relief outweighs long-term optionality. Then there's social reinforcement. Family-approved stable roles. Peers understand traditional career ladders. LinkedIn titles in well-known companies signal legitimacy. Risk-oriented moves are harder to explain. Even if the math makes sense, the optics feel uncertain. The stable path wins socially. Another subtle factor is identity. When someone chooses stability, they begin to see themselves as steady, dependable, rational. That identity becomes self-reinforcing. Future decisions are filtered through that lens. Is this consistent with who I am? And because stability is associated with maturity, deviation starts to feel immature. Not dangerous, just off-brand. The leverage path requires tolerating ambiguity. It requires separating short-term discomfort from long-term positioning. That skill isn't intuitive, especially in a culture that rewards visible stability. So when both people stand at the fork, the stable path doesn't feel conservative. It feels correct, which is why so many capable, intelligent people choose it. The important part isn't that the decision is logical. It's that logic is being applied to the wrong time frame. Short-term logic, long-term consequence. And once the stable structure is built, it doesn't just sit there. It starts shaping the kinds of choices that feel available later. That's where the divergence becomes visible. At first, the stable path looks smoother. The income arrives consistently. Raises happen on schedule. Performance reviews reinforce progress. There's momentum. Life decisions start aligning with that momentum. Bigger commitments feel safe. Long-term obligations feel manageable. The future feels forecastable. The leverage path feels different. Income fluctuates. Opportunities depend on performance. Results aren't guaranteed. Planning feels less precise. But something subtle begins to happen. Because income isn't assumed to be perfectly steady. Spending patterns adapt. Fixed costs stay lighter. Commitments are chosen more cautiously. Buffers are prioritized. Not out of fear, out of necessity. Meanwhile, the stable path builds around predictability. Commitments increase. Lifestyle upgrades feel justified. Long-term obligations stack comfortably. After all, income has been reliable. Nothing about this is reckless. It's rational. But rational decisions compound too. Here's where divergence quietly starts. When new opportunities appear, the person on the stable path evaluates them against what already exists. Will this disrupt my current position? Can my structure absorb the risk? Is the upside worth the instability? Those are sensible questions, but they often favor continuity. The person on the leverage path evaluates differently. Does this expand my upside? Does this build long-term positioning? Is the downside survivable? Same intelligence, different framing. Over time, this framing compounds. The stable path becomes increasingly optimized for protection. The leverage path becomes increasingly optimized for expansion. Neither feels dramatic. There's no sudden leap, just small reinforcements. One person grows more cautious because they have more to protect. The other grows more comfortable with calculated uncertainty because their life was designed to tolerate it. And this is where the financial difference begins to surface. Not in income at first, in flexibility, in how each person responds to change. One needs stability to function. The other can absorb volatility without panic. And in an economy where change is constant, that tolerance becomes leverage in itself. The split didn't happen in 1 year. It happened through reinforcement. One decision shaped the structure. The structure shaped the next decision. And eventually, the trajectories stop looking similar at all. For a long time, the difference isn't obvious. Both people can afford their lives. Both are respected in their careers. Both feel like functioning adults. The gap doesn't show up in status. It shows up in position. When the economy shifts, one person feels exposed. The other feels adaptable. When layoffs happen, the stable path suddenly reveals its dependency. Because the structure was built around continuity, any interruption feels threatening. Large fixed commitments, expectations tied to steady income, a lifestyle that assumes predictability. Meanwhile, the leverage path, accustomed to fluctuation, has built resilience almost by accident. Income variability was already part of life. Risk wasn't new. Uncertainty wasn't foreign, so shocks feel disruptive, but not catastrophic. The second place the gap appears is in opportunity timing. A new role opens. A partnership becomes possible. A move to a different industry appears. The stable path calculates cost first. What happens if this doesn't work? How long can I afford instability? What do I risk losing? The leverage path calculates upside first. If this works, how much does it change my trajectory? Is the downside survivable? What's the ceiling? Same math, different emphasis. Over time, ceiling matters more than floor. The stable path protects the floor. The leverage path occasionally raises the ceiling. That's where compounding begins to diverge, not in one explosive leap, but in cumulative positioning. Equity stakes that grow quietly. Revenue streams that scale. Reputation built in dynamic environments. Meanwhile, the stable path continues rising, but linearly. Predictable increases. Steady advancement. Limited volatility. Linear growth feels good for a while, but when nonlinear opportunities appear, only one person is structurally ready for them. And that's the key. This wasn't about who worked harder. It was about who built a life that could handle volatility without collapsing. By the time this difference becomes visible, years have passed. One person feels increasingly careful. The other feels increasingly positioned. Same starting line, one decision. And now the financial lives don't just look different, they feel different. Here's the uncomfortable realization. The stable path wasn't a mistake. It was coherent. It reduced stress. It increased predictability. It aligned with what most people define as responsible adulthood. And for many years, it worked exactly as intended. The issue isn't that it failed. The issue is that it optimized for the wrong variable. It optimized for certainty, not leverage. That distinction doesn't matter in the short term. But over decades, it changes everything. Because certainty protects what you already have. Leverage expands what you can become. When someone chooses certainty early and keeps reinforcing it, their financial life gradually becomes structured around protection. Protection of income, protection of commitments, protection of identity. And protection has a cost. It narrows the range of acceptable moves. It makes deviation feel expensive. It makes volatility feel threatening. It makes bold shifts feel irresponsible. Meanwhile, the person who tolerated early instability built a different relationship with uncertainty. They didn't eliminate risk. They learned to operate within it. And once you're comfortable operating within uncertainty, your ceiling rises. Not because you chase chaos, but because you don't require perfect safety to move. This is why two disciplined, intelligent people can end up feeling so different about money. One feels careful. The other feels positioned. One protects what exists. The other occasionally expands it. Neither was lazy. Neither lacked discipline. They just optimized for different futures without fully realizing it. And the hardest part? At the moment the decision was made, there was no clear signal of which path would compound better. It looked like preference. It was architecture. Which leads to the only part that really matters now. Here's the rule most people miss. Security compounds differently than leverage. Security protects what exists. Leverage expands what's possible. Neither is inherently wrong. But if you spend decades optimizing only for protection, you shouldn't be surprised when expansion feels distant. You didn't fail at money. You followed a path that was designed to minimize downside, not maximize upside. And minimizing downside feels wise, until you realize you've built a life that requires consistency more than it allows acceleration. From here, the goal isn't to reject stability, it's to evaluate direction. Before committing to any major decision, ask, if I keep reinforcing this pattern, what does my financial life look like in 20 years? Not this year, not next quarter. Long enough for compounding to reveal itself, because single decisions rarely change everything overnight. But repeated decisions in the same direction always do. The difference between those two people wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It was how early they decided what kind of volatility their life would be built to handle. You don't need to rewrite your past, but you can redesign your next reinforcement. If this helped you see your financial path more clearly, subscribe. And if you haven't left a like yet, tap the thumbs up. It helps this video reach people who think they failed when they may have just followed the wrong direction. Because once direction becomes intentional, effort finally compounds the way it's supposed to.